Welcome into another episode of Locked On Phillies, and today it's our Phillies year in review show, the good, the bad, and the resolutions for next year from 2024.
You are Locked On Phillies, your daily Philadelphia Phillies podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, this is Locked On Phillies. I'm your host, Connor Thomas. Thank you so much for joining us today. We come to you as part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. You may know me from some of my other work in the sports talk space. I've been on 97.5 The Fanatic, doing sports talk radio here in Philadelphia for 5 years. I've been a credentialed Philadelphia Phillies media member for 3 seasons, and this is my 3rd year as the host of Locked On Phillies. Please make sure that you're leaving a rating and a review if you're listening to this in podcast form. We would appreciate that very much, and would also appreciate you checking us out on YouTube. And when you do that, go to the Locked On Phillies channel and hit the subscribe button. It'll get you notifications when new episodes are posted, so you keep up to date with all the big off-season news. It's also a great way to help us out here on Locked On Phillies by doing that. So appreciate everyone who's done that and appreciate everyone who's going to do that. So today, obviously, is New Year's Eve. Well, maybe not obviously, depending on when you're listening to this, but at the time of me recording this, and it will be posted, it's New Year's Eve. So that means we have time for reflection. That's always what the end of the year brings, right? It brings a chance to look back on the 365, or was this a leap year? Maybe 366 days. And you look back on all of the good and the bad, and then you make resolutions for the future. So that's what we're going to do for the Philadelphia Phillies today, looking back on the 2024 season. And there is a lot to remember fondly. There were a lot of big moments for the Philadelphia Phillies in 2024, and none bigger. We're going to start from the back. None bigger than winning the National League East. For the first time in 13 years, the NL East belongs to the Philadelphia Phillies. Now, I know not the ultimate goal, the World Series, an NL pennant. Those are things that the Philadelphia Phillies wanted to accomplish this year that they fell short of. But this is the good segment. So we're going to just talk about the accomplishment one more time of winning the division and what that does for the Philadelphia Phillies, right? It's not the world's greatest thing with the expectations of a World Series championship, but it still is a major accomplishment. Like, just to think about 13 years gone by, you might be sitting here saying, wow, it's been a long year. Think of all the stuff I've done in 2024. Now multiply that by 13. That's how long it had been since the Philadelphia Phillies were able to say that their division belonged to them. That's a long, long time, folks. And that's something that should not be overlooked. That's a major accomplishment. Only 6 teams in baseball win their division. And that is something that the Phillies can hang their hat on. On top of that, there were some unbelievable marks by the Philadelphia Phillies in the regular season. Of course, we're going to leave the postseason stuff for the next segment, unfortunately, as we review the not so good, I should say. I know it says the bad on this graphic here if you're watching on YouTube, but the not so good from 2024. But to go out and put up 95 wins, to have 3 pitchers get votes in the National League Cy Young Award race, to have multiple All-Stars, nearly the whole infield for the National League All-Star team. Starters, by the way, were Philadelphia Phillies. Alec Boehm, Trey Turner, Bryce Harper, first base, shortstop, third base, all Philadelphia Phillies, not to mention you had a couple of pitchers, a couple of bullpen guys. It was a really great showing in the Midsummer Classic for the Philadelphia Phillies. And they had other guys that were probably close that deserved to be there or were in the conversation at least. That's an amazing quality of roster, and that's the start of it. And there were some really great seasons put together. Like Bryce Harper showed once again why he is one of the greatest baseball players on planet Earth. He had an incredible year. He had what in normal circumstances would be something that could probably garner him an MVP vote or two. Not enough to win it, but it just so happened that there were some ridiculous seasons out there across baseball. But it doesn't take away from what Bryce Harper's done. He continues to just be one of the most consistently great athletes in professional sports today. We have him. How about the bounce back year from Trey Turner? The numbers that he was able to put up hitting wise. And this fielding, of course, still needs to continue to improve. But this is, again, the positive segment. What a bounce back from him. Nick Castellanos, in a year following an offseason where there were trade rumors about him, He came out and was the most consistent player for the Philadelphia Phillies in an outfield that really needed it. And he played all 162. Like, that's amazing that in the year 2024, the Philadelphia Phillies, as I fix my chair, sorry, give me a second. The Philadelphia Phillies had a guy play every single baseball game in the world of load management and rest and sports science. And everybody needs an extra day to recover, it seems. Nick Castellanos said, screw all that. I'm going to go play every single one. And that's something that, frankly, I'm surprised that we don't celebrate more here in this city. That is so Philadelphia. That is so the fabric of this fan base in the city, to go out there and just go to work day in and day out and do what you need to do to be available. And he doesn't get enough credit for that. I mean, I'm just talking about the position players at this point, but let's talk about the pitching staff too. You had the second best pitching staff of my lifetime. I'm still going to give the nod to the 2010 four aces, but when you look at what the Philadelphia Phillies were able to accomplish on the mound this year between Wheeler and Nola and Suarez and Sanchez, absolutely unbelievable work by them. You just had a dominant pitching staff. And by the way, like, we can still look back on the good from this offseason so far. Adding Jesus Luzardo to that mix, come on, guys. This pitching staff's going to be nasty again in 2025, so that's good. So the Philadelphia Phillies excelled in a lot of areas. And I'm just going to think back on a couple of, like, special moments from the 2024 season. You know what's wild is, like, the first place my mind goes, and I don't know why it goes here, and it's not the biggest moment of the year, but it was something that was really, really cool. It was Tyler Phillips throwing a complete game. I believe actually a complete game shutout. The hometown kid getting an opportunity with injuries hitting the pitching staff midway through the season, and Taijuan Walker not getting the job done in the fifth spot in the rotation. He goes out there, and the local area kid just has a dream moment, an absolute dream moment. Like, that is incredible for him individually. I think back to the London series and Bryce Harper hitting the first home run in that series, the short 2-game series against the Mets, and then doing the soccer slide and screaming that he loves football, talking about, of course, the British version of football, which is soccer. But that is one of those moments where it's just like, put Bryce on stage, put him on a national, like, TV game or anything like that, and watch him work. He's going to always rise to the occasion. That was really, really special for the Philadelphia Phillies to have that moment internationally. And it was special for Phillies fans to be able to go over there and have the trip of the lifetime and then see that. Like, that was something that you don't get to see every year. Only a couple teams get to go over there, and it's just rare that you not only get to go over there, but get to see a special moment from your best player. Unless your team is Bryce Harper, and then your best player on your team is Bryce Harper, I should say. And then the bet that something special is going to happen is pretty darn good. I mean, there were all kinds of milestones, and it was just an insanely good year for everybody. As far as the best years in 2024 from a position player and a pitcher, the pitcher, I'm going to have to go with Zach Wheeler. His year, after signing a extension in the offseason and getting that done, making sure that he is locked down long-term so the Philadelphia Phillies know that they have their ace taken care of. After signing Aaron Nola, then taking care of that, I mean, that was a remarkable deal by Dave Dombrowski, and Zach Wheeler repaid him and the organization with one of the best single seasons by a Philadelphia Phillies pitcher that we've ever seen. It was next level what Zach Wheeler did. He has got to be the pitcher of the year for 2024 and the position player of the year for 2024. As much as I would love to give it to, like, Nick Castellanos for the Iron Man attitude, or like a breakout star, maybe like an Alec Boehm who made his first All-Star team as an All-Star starter, it's the guy we were talking about. This team still begins and ends with Bryce Harper. They do. And Bryce Harper was the best player on this team when you look at position players in 2024. Nick Castellanos, you could argue, was the most valuable player, but I'm talking about the best. I'm not talking about the who added the most. I'm talking about when he was available, clearly the best player out there on the field every single time was first baseman Bryce Harper, who Silver Slugger, Gold Glove finalist, absolutely insane work to be that good at a position at first base that he hadn't played really before. I can't say enough good things about him. This is the core of this team. And with all these great things to talk about from 2024, think about how the season ended, right? I'm going to turn the negative into a positive real quick. The season ended in a nightmare, losing to the New York Mets in the NLDS and collapsing and all of those words that you want to use to describe another miserable playoff exit by the Philadelphia Phillies. There's no sugarcoating that. But what I will sugarcoat as we look back on the year is the year itself. In a year that ended so terribly, think back on all the great moments. Like, even if this year, the Philadelphia Phillies in 2025, they don't end the year with the World Series trophy in their possession, at least you know that you're going to have amazing moments. Like, you're going to have a season you could be excited about. You're going to have a season where your team wins a bunch of games and maybe a division again, and you have one of the best players in the world and one of the best pitchers in the world, and we take that for granted. And I'm not trying to say that that's okay. They don't have to win the World Series. No. They got to win the World Series. That's the only thing that will constitute a successful season in 2025. But with that being said, to know that they may come up short, it's at least comforting to say, hey, even if it goes bad at the end, this team is too good to not give you special moments and make your summer and fall something to remember. So some of the best times of this year for me were during the Philadelphia Phillies season and what this team was able to accomplish and the magic that they created early on. And then, of course, things changed a little bit, which we're going to talk about in just a second when we get to the not so good from this past year segment. But as far as the year 2024, the Philadelphia Phillies still made some amazing memories for a lot of fans, a lot of people out there, myself included. And they give us something to look forward to in 2025 as they still have an incredibly talented roster getting ready for the next Major League Baseball season. Now, if that sounded like I was propping up the Phillies a bunch, that's because it was the good segment. But if you're one of those people like, how could he not talk about the second half of the season collapse or the postseason series or the issues and the struggles and everything? Well, I'm going to coming up. A year has a lot of ups and downs. Everybody. Nobody has a perfect year. Not a single person on this planet. And the Philadelphia Phillies players, pitchers, organization as a whole, they're no different. So we will talk about the downside of the 2024 season and remember some of the moments that maybe we'd like to forget. Maybe it's time to leave them in 2024. We'll talk about that coming up as we continue today's episode. Let's talk about Rocket Money first. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps lower your bills so you can grow your savings. It brings everything together in one place, whether it's subscriptions, your spending habits, or even the goals you want to hit this year. You got a new year starting. You got to get your finances in line, and you can do that with Rocket Money. They have over 5 million users, and they've saved a total of $500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when using all of the app's premium features. I mean, that's a lot of dollar signs, folks, and that could be in your pocket. Could you imagine what you'd do with nearly $1,000 saved in 2025? How much of a difference that would make to you to just have that in your pocket? That's vacation money. That's maybe renovation money. That's new wardrobe money. Whatever you want to spend that on, groceries for a while. Like, that's a lot of savings that you could have by using Rocket Money. For me, my favorite feature that they have is the subscription tracker, where you use it to cancel services that you weren't using anymore, you don't remember. So that's a great way to make sure your money's not just going off into the ether to stuff you don't use. So go ahead and check it out. I mean, you can cancel your unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/locked on today. That's rocketmoney.com/locked on. rocketmoney.com/locked on. Well, folks, that's the last ad read of 2024 I just did. If you're listening to this free and premium, appreciate you doing that and everything. But it's been a fun year. A little bit later on, as we wrap up and we do the resolutions at the end of this episode, I'm going to talk a little bit about the year for the podcast specifically, just a short little bit. But I do have thank yous to give out to each and every one of you who have joined us on Locked On Phillies. Now, in joining us on Locked On Phillies, you've seen some great times. And you've also heard me or watched me talk about some bad times too. That's how years go. Sometimes you have good days. Sometimes you have bad days. Sometimes you have good games. Sometimes you have bad games. And the Philadelphia Phillies, well, they had mostly good games for the first half of 2024's regular season. And then everything kind of went haywire. And they completely, after coming back from London, just fell apart. And I don't think it had anything to do with like the London trip. I know that's this big narrative that the fan base has been punching around for months and months now, that, well, the Phillies, they came back from London, they weren't the same. They had the big break to travel there, the big break to travel back. It messed up the flow of their season. I don't think that's it at all. I really don't. I think the Phillies went into a slump, started pressing, didn't really attack it the right way, and they didn't come out of it fast enough. And they did a little bit towards the end of the season. They won enough games to win the division and get to 95. Like, that's not a full season or half season even slump. That's a couple months that they did not play up to their standard. And I'm not trying to say, oh, they didn't have a terrible stretch of the season. I'm trying to say they pulled enough out of it that the regular season was still a success. They had the second best record in all of baseball, trailing only the Los Angeles Dodgers when heading into the postseason. So they did everything they could do. I mean, it wasn't realistic heading into the year that they were going to be ahead of the Dodgers in the standings. But then again, you could probably argue it wouldn't have been realistic to say, hey, they're going to beat the Braves. And some people did, but most people said, nah, it's still the Braves division. The Phillies, well, they took it comfortably took the division. So I'm not letting them off the hook. The second half of the season was miserable. There were games where I would just sit there and be like, do I really have to watch this? And I do, because of this podcast and what I do for work on the radio. Like, I'm forced and held hostage by the Philadelphia Phillies to watch every game and watch every post game and read articles the next day. And when they're going bad, it hits me as much as it hits you. I promise you, I am a fan just like you. So that collapse in the second half, or rather we'll call it a major slump, because they did come out of it a little bit. The collapse in the postseason, that was a collapse, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But it's just a reminder of how quickly baseball seasons can change. It was a learning experience, I think, for a lot of folks in the Philadelphia Phillies fan base, in the Phillies organization, the players, the coaches. Like, they had, you look at the trends of the past couple years. In 2022, they were just kind of hanging around, trying to find their way into the postseason for the first time in a decade. Then they get in, they get hot, but there was no like, oh, we're slumping, playing way below our watermark. We didn't know what their watermark was at that point. Then in 2023, you get into a situation where the team played well, but Atlanta and the New York Mets played incredibly. You had two 100-win teams in the division. The Phillies didn't really have slumps at that point. They just didn't quite play as well as the top tier teams. And then both those teams get knocked out, one by you, one by the Padres, and you make it to the NLCS again. And it's just like, okay, well, we didn't really have this major stretch of the season where we weren't playing well. It was just kind of this either steadiness or steady build, depending on what point of the season you were looking at. So in 2024, the Philadelphia Phillies had to come to terms with the fact that great teams go through bad stretches. It happens. It really does. It happens to a lot of great teams in history of baseball. It's going to happen to a lot of great teams in the future of baseball. So the Phillies are not alone in that they went through a tough stretch, but maybe they learned from that, right? I give a shout out a lot these days to the folks on Locked On Eagles, right? Because the Eagles are the team foremost on my mind with my radio job. And the Eagles last year, if you're a Philadelphia Eagles fan, you know, they went through a terrible collapse at the end of the season, one of the worst in football history. And then what did they do? Well, this year, when they started off slow, it seems that they've learned from that. And the locker room stuck together and they pushed through, and they're one of the best teams in football now. And you could strongly argue that last year's collapse laid the framework for this year's success. The hope for the Philadelphia Phillies is that last year's regular season slumps set the foundation for this year's regular season and hopefully more consistent play. And who knows what they can do? Could you imagine if they had played at the level that they did for the first half of the season, for the full season? They could have set the all-time wins mark in baseball. There was a point where we were pacing them out for that. The all-time wins mark, not just in franchise history, but in the history of Major League Baseball. And that's a lofty goal that doesn't really matter, because the team that holds that record, the Seattle Mariners, they didn't win the World Series. So I don't know. It's not, again, regular season accomplishment. This team's goal is the World Series. But hopefully the bad from this year, they'll learn. The chasing, the bullpen struggles late. I mean, the fielding issues at points, the bad base runnings, maybe some coaching decisions. Like, they'll learn from that going into 2025. I have to believe they will. Sometimes you have to go backwards before you go forwards, and that's what the Philadelphia Phillies have done the past couple of years in the postseason. Speaking of, we got to leave the Mets collapse in 2024. We have to. I can't spend 2025 and the season discussing, well, what they did against the Mets. Well, they played so well and then it didn't matter. We've known already. We've known since the Diamondbacks series in 2023 in the NLCS that quality of team, regular season record, when you get to the postseason, throw out the record books. I mean, it's the hot team that finds a way. And that's why peaking at the right time is important. I think the Phillies learned that lesson. The fan base, we learned that lesson. It's getting a little bit lucky. It's getting the right matchups, which, again, that goes back to luck. And it's having guys that are ready for the moment. And this past year, the Philadelphia Phillies didn't do enough in the postseason to advance even one round. Now, they had a bye. They had one of the 2 first-round byes. So, they were waiting there for another team. So they didn't lose out in the wild card series. But it's not much consolation. Just the thing that you got to think about here is, that happens. It happened to the Braves 2 years in a row. Could you imagine that? Could you imagine having to go through that again this year? Hopefully we don't have to. But, hey, time will tell. We'll see what the Philadelphia Phillies do. Only the players in that locker room can make that determination, not us in the fan base. But that's just something that it's going to drive us insane if we go through the entire 2025 season with the lens of, hey, well, they fell apart to the Mets last year. Even if they win 150 games out of 162, we're still going to worry about, well, what if they chase in the postseason? What if they choke? What if this? What if that? What if the bullpen doesn't show up? What if the starting pitching isn't good enough? We're going to have these questions either way. I can't go through the whole season worrying about this boogeyman of a faceless team that the Phillies might run into that's hot. It's just, that's baseball, and worrying about it does us no good. So I think something we have to leave in 2024 is the talk of that Mets NLDS. We know it wasn't good. We know the issues that caused it. It's time to move on and start to focus on the next season. And every season exists. For some players, you build. If you stay with the team, you can build on chemistry. You can build on experience, all of that stuff. You can learn from past experiences. But every season is also this self-contained individual thing. You got to wipe past years. You got to show up. Hope springs eternal is the old saying about the first day of the Major League Baseball season. For every team, you believe that, hey, maybe this year, you never know. For the Phillies, part of that process is going to be letting last year go. As a member of the fan base, I need to ask you to do that as well. When we head into 2025, let's push that behind us. We'll have plenty of time to talk about a lot of ups and downs for the 2025 year. We don't have to worry about the troubles of the past anymore. Coming up, we're going to talk about some resolutions for the 2025 season for some Philadelphia Phillies players, the organization, just stuff that they need to kind of write down on a whiteboard in the facility and say, hey, we're not doing this year, or we are doing more of this year. Actually, positive reinforcement, I hear, is better. So the things that we're going to do more of in 2025, we'll talk about it coming up as we wrap up the final year's episode of Locked On Phillies. All right, so what are some resolutions for the Philadelphia Phillies in 2025? Things that they're going to do better, or things that they should aim to do better. The first one is obviously approach at the plate. You need to have a more, I don't want to say conservative, right? Because the second you start to think about not swinging as often or not being as aggressive, you take away your ability to be violent with your at-bats, your ability to be the aggressor in at-bats. Sometimes you want to be. Sometimes you want to have the upper hand. You can't always have the upper hand. But when you get the opportunity, you got to take it. So it's not so much be conservative. It's just, I'll say, be more measured in their approach at the plate. That should be the number one resolution for the Philadelphia Phillies. It's been this trend over the past couple of seasons where they have guys that want to impact the game. This is what happens when you get a bunch of stars together. They all want to be the guy. And that's a good thing. That can breed success. That can lead to a 95-win season and a division championship. But sometimes when you're pressing, when the rest of the team is struggling, these guys all feel like they have to be the guy, and they step outside of their roles and they overswing. And the next thing you know, you're in a major slump, and your season is kind of falling apart before your eyes. Number one thing is you have to have a more measured approach at the plate. I also think that their resolution on the base paths should be to not change as much as people would think, right? I don't think the base running for the Philadelphia Phillies is as bad as it seems when you see guys get picked off or thrown out. They make some boneheaded plays on the base paths. But I think if you watch 162 games of every team in baseball, you would see that. Here's the thing with the Phillies. They are aggressive at the plate. They are aggressive on the base paths. That is the identity of this team. And while there are some things that you need to roll back, I'm not saying they're the perfect base running team. Don't change a thing. Don't change your identity at all. I am going to say, hopefully you can hear that. There's fireworks in the background. People are jumping early for New Year's Eve. But what I would say to the Philadelphia Phillies base running wise is don't let anyone make you completely non-aggressive, right? Take extra bags. You have a lot of guys with good base running instincts, veteran players, speed, athleticism. You can create havoc on the base paths with this team. And if you completely reel back in on that, you're going to take away something that could be a benefit for the team. As far as pitching is concerned, I want to say don't change a thing. Like, I really do want to say that. But maybe the better thing is for the organization pitching-wise, make sure that you have more depth than what you had. Part of the issue is when Taijuan Walker just completely collapsed, you didn't really have a great option for the 2024 fifth starter role. You had to either go with Michael Mercado or Tyler Phillips or, excuse me, you had to find some type of guy to call up from the minors to make spot starts. Colby Allard made a start, maybe move someone out of the bullpen and do like an opener role. Like, there was just not a great opportunity for the Philadelphia Phillies to make up for that. Now, they've already done that. They've got Jesus Luzardo, which means Taijuan Walker could now be depth. But now Andrew Painter is depth. That's a pretty good depth option. Joe Ross in the bullpen is a swing man. They didn't really have a true swing man last year because Matt Strahm was that guy. And then, well, actually, I'm completely lying. Spencer Turnbull did a great job in 2024. How could I forget? But he then went down, and that really hurt you too. So as you see, you need more than just one. But Spencer Turnbull was that guy. It's clear you need to add more. So that would be the resolution on the pitching side, is just make sure that you have more than you need when it comes to pitching depth, because injuries are going to happen. But as far as performance is concerned, the bullpen stuff in the postseason was an anomaly. The starting pitching was outstanding all the way through. When you look at the guys who are actually going to be on the team this year, not counting Taijuan Walker, of course, and not counting the guys that like popped up as like spot starters. The big four: Wheeler, Nola, Suarez, Sanchez. Unbelievable year. Not many notes. I guess Ranger Suarez work on the immune system and the health and everything like that so that you're more available. But when he's available, he's darn good. It's just, there's very little to say negatively about the pitching staff, and resolutions are things that you want to do better. The pitching staff, if they have the same year that they had in 2024 in 2025 with the addition of the guys they added this offseason, they're going to be outstanding. They really are. They're going to be one of the best in baseball again, potentially the best. So those are just some resolutions and things that the Phillies should keep an eye on as they move towards 2025 to work on. But it is another year gone. And real quick before I round out this episode, I just want to give a sincere thank you to everybody out there who tuned in to Locked On Phillies over the past year. Whether you listened on the podcast stream, whether you watched us on YouTube, whether you left a rating and reviewing, whether you subscribe to the YouTube channel or not, even if you watched for just 1 minute or a million minutes, I appreciate you taking the time to join us for Locked On Phillies. Just to give you an idea of what you helped us accomplish, we have more than doubled our subscribers in the year 2024. We doubled our time spent watching on YouTube. We have done so many more views this year than last year, more than doubled that. Like, the numbers are going up at an insane rate, and that is thanks to you guys for tuning into Locked On Phillies and wanting to be caught up in the Philadelphia Phillies fever of the early season, but also sticking with us through the tough times and trying to figure out what in the world is wrong with this team together. And then working through the offseason. Like, you guys have been here with me every step of the way, and I appreciate you very much making this a special year for Locked On Phillies. Now the goal, double it again in 2025. So I'm not going anywhere. The content is not slowing down. Locked On Phillies, we're going to do even bigger things in 2025. So trust me, This is not an end of anything. We are continuing just like normal as we roll into the new year. But I wanted to take the time to say thank you very much for making this a special year for me and a special year for the Locked On Phillies podcast. I can't thank you enough, but I did my best right there. One thing, just to remind you, as we celebrate this New Year's Eve, make sure that each and every one of you are safe. If you're going out, make sure you have a ride, a way to get home safe, all of that stuff. You never want to start New Year's Eve on a bad note. You never want to make a bad decision to end your 2024 or to start your 2025. So make good decisions, enjoy the New Year's Eve celebrations, and get ready for a big year of Philadelphia Phillies baseball and Philadelphia Phillies baseball podcasting as we head towards the new year. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network here on Locked On Phillies. I will talk to you. I love this joke. I'll talk to you next year.